Have you ever felt like, a fear or anxiety was just like part of you
Yeah.
and you never really understood why? Like it
Yeah.
was just ingrained in you? Well, today we're going to really go deep on this idea of inherited family trauma.
Uh,
How stuff from like generations ago could still be messing with us today. And we're going to base this deep dive on It Didn't Start With You by Mark Wolynn.
Great book.
It's really fascinating because it blends all this cutting edge research. Like you've got neuroscience, epigenetics in there, but it also ties in like psychotherapy and real life stories,
Absolutely.
which I think makes it all click.
Yeah.
And for me, the most impactful part is how Wolynn connects this like heavy science, especially the epigenetics, to our everyday lives.
Right.
Yeah.
He does a great job of making it relatable.
Yeah. So for people who might not be familiar with epigenetics, how would you explain it? Like, what's the gist?
Okay, so imagine your genes are like a bunch of light bulbs, okay?
I like this. Light bulb.
They're all wired up, ready to go.
Yeah.
Right. But imagine someone comes along and sticks a piece of tape over the switch on some of those bulbs.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
So the light bulb or gene, it's still there. It hasn't disappeared.
Right.
But that little piece of tape is stopping it from actually switching on.
Okay, so the tape is like blocking it. Gotcha.
Exactly. And in this scenario, that tape is kind of like something called DNA methylation.
Okay, yeah. I've heard of that, but I don't really get it.
Basically, it's a process where a methyl group, which is like a chemical tag,
Right.
attaches to a gene and it basically flips the off switch, like putting your tape on.
Oh, so it changes how that gene acts, basically.
Exactly. It changes how it expresses itself. And what's crazy is studies are showing that traumatic events, famines, wars, that kind of thing, they can trigger this methylation.
Whoa, seriously. So, like, if my grandfather went through a famine,
Yeah.
could that impact how my genes work today?
That's what the research is pointing to, yeah. There was a really interesting study, I think it was in the Netherlands, on people who were conceived during a huge famine.
Wow.
The researchers, they found that later on, as adults, those individuals had a higher chance of having certain health issues compared to siblings who weren't conceived during the famine.
So, like, their genes were still remembering the famine, even decades later.
It seems that way. And, DNA methylation is just one way this whole epigenetics thing works.
Right. Because it's not all about the genes themselves, is it?
No, not at all.
Right.
We have to think about our environment, too. Even the environment we're exposed to before we're even born.
You mean like in the womb?
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting when you think about what Wolynn calls the family body.
The family body.
It's this idea that we don't just inherit genes, right? We also unconsciously carry these, like, fragments of unresolved trauma from our family.
Wow.
So imagine a pregnant woman who is going through a lot of stress. Her body's just flooded with all these stress hormones.
Right.
And those hormones, they're impacting the baby, too.
That makes sense, but it's also kind of scary, isn't it?
It is. Because it means that even if we don't remember any big traumatic events from our own lives, our bodies might still be holding on to that, like a memory, an echo of that past.
And those echoes, they can manifest in like a bunch of different ways, right?
Absolutely, like anxiety and depression, for sure.
Yeah.
Even physical health problems.
It's like there's this whole conversation happening inside us that we don't even know about.
Yeah, shaping who we are in ways that, we might not even realize.
So we're talking about these echoes from the past, these invisible connections to our family's experiences.
Yeah.
But what does this actually look like, in the real world?
Well, that's what I think is so powerful about this book.
Yeah.
Wolynn, he doesn't just talk about theories.
Right.
He brings in these really compelling case studies that really show you how strong this inherited trauma can be. Like, there's this one about a young man, Jesse, and he was dealing with really bad insomnia.
Oh, wow.
Couldn't sleep.
Like couldn't sleep at all.
Yeah, it was really debilitating. And it turns out it started when he was 19,
Okay.
the exact same age that his uncle died
Oh, no.
in a really, really traumatic accident.
Wow.
And it was something that nobody in the family ever talked about.
Oh, wow. So even though Jesse didn't consciously know, like, the details of the accident,
Right.
his body was still carrying that pain.
That's what it seems like. That Jesse's insomnia, it wasn't just his own. It was like he was carrying the weight of his uncle's trauma, too,
Wow.
Like an echo across generations.
And that's just one example.
Yeah. He's got a bunch of them. There's another one that's really stuck with me
Okay.
about this woman, Gretchen, and She always had this like intense anxiety and this recurring feeling of wanting to just disappear.
Disappear?
Yeah, like vaporize. She used those words, actually. Vaporize, incinerate.
Intense.
It's heavy stuff. And guess what?
What?
Those are the exact same words her grandmother used to describe her own experiences.
No way.
Yeah. Surviving the Holocaust.
It's like our bodies hold on to these stories,
Yeah.
even when our minds don't even know about them. It's kind of freaky when you think about it.
It is. It really makes you wonder what we might be carrying around without even realizing it, right?
Yeah, for sure. And it's not even just like individual stories, is it?
Right.
This whole family body thing, it makes me think about bigger patterns that could be playing out across generations.
Absolutely. And Wolynn talks about how a lot of these patterns, they come from what he calls the core sentence.
The core sentence, what's that?
So it's like this short, emotionally charged phrase
Okay.
that kind of sums up your deepest fear.
Oh.
And it's usually rooted in your family history somehow. It might be something like, I'll be abandoned, or, I'm not safe.
So it's like getting to the core of those anxieties, the ones that just don't make sense no matter how much you try to like rationalize them.
Exactly.
So how do we figure out what our own core sentence might be?
So, Wolynn, he says to pay attention to your, what he calls core complaints in life.
Core complaints?
Yeah. Like, what are the things you find yourself struggling with over and over?
Okay.
What are those fears that keep coming up no matter how hard you try to ignore them?
Right.
Once you've got a potential core sentence, then you can use what he calls bridging questions.
Bridging questions. So we're literally trying to bridge the gap between our experience and like our ancestors.
Exactly.
Okay. I like it. So like, give me an example. How does that work?
Okay, let's say your core sentence is, I'll never be good enough. A bridging question could be, did anyone in my family ever feel like they weren't good enough?
Oh, interesting.
Or was there a lot of pressure to achieve in my family, that kind of thing?
Right, like looking for those parallels.
Exactly. It's like you're putting together a puzzle, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to find the missing pieces in your family history that might explain why you feel the way you do today.
It's kind of like detective work, but for your own life.
That's a great way to put it. And here's the thing. Even if you don't have all the answers,
Right. Even if there are gaps in your family history, just acknowledging these connections can be a really powerful step towards healing.
it's pretty amazing when you think about it. Even if we don't know the actual family stories, our bodies are still reacting like it's happening right now.
It is pretty wild.
So if we can inherit all this trauma,
Yeah.
can we actually heal it? Like not just for ourselves, but for, future generations too.
That's the hopeful part.
Yeah.
And yeah, Wolynn gives a lot of different tools and techniques in the book.
Okay.
But for me, the biggest takeaway is that simply becoming aware of these patterns,
Right.
that's a huge first step.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like once you actually see it,
Right.
it loses its power over you, or at least some of its power.
Exactly.
It's like that saying, knowledge is power. I like that.
Yeah.
Because your conscious mind, it can start to process what your body's been holding on to maybe for like your whole life or even longer,
Yeah. Wow.
And beyond just knowing,
Yeah.
Wolynn walks you through this really powerful visualization
Okay.
where you actually picture the family member you think might be connected to your core sentence,
Okay.
and you just acknowledge their pain.
So you're like offering compassion, even if you can't go back and change anything.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's a way of acknowledging that what happened to them, as awful as it was, it shaped you, right?
That's really powerful.
And then he takes it even a step further.
Okay.
He talks about creating healing sentences.
Healing sentences. Okay, I've never heard those.
So they're like positive affirmations that basically counteract the negative beliefs you might have picked up.
Oh, interesting.
So let's say your core sentence is like, I'm not safe. Your healing sentence might be something like, I am safe and supported.
So it's like you're changing the story, right?
Yeah.
Rewriting the script.
Exactly. And not just for yourself, but for your kids, your grandkids.
Wow. And that is an incredibly powerful thing to think about. Like, we're not just surviving this, we're actually breaking free. And we can help others do the same.
That's what it's all about.
I love that. Well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive on It Didn't Start With You. It's such a thought-provoking book, and I know I'm definitely going to be spending some time thinking about my own core sentence and those bridging questions.
I think it's something we can all benefit from.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, we want to hear from you. Have you discovered your core sentence? What insights have you gained from exploring your family history? Let us know. You can find us on all the socials. Until next time, keep asking those tough questions and keep digging deeper into the fascinating world of the human experience.